So we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I'm sorry I can't really see you guys over there. You're but thanks for being here too. I appreciate everyone making the trek up to Lincoln. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight. We've been working through getting the articles done. We have some more work to complete on that, and we're also going to spend a good chunk of this meeting talking about the report. I'd like to, again, appreciate the work that we've been doing in our last few meetings. We've been doing some hard work and some great discussions, and I think we're making some progress on where we need to be. With that being said, I want to just kind of challenge the group tonight that I think at the last meeting we kind of did an experiment with starting our discussion of each topic with a motion, and that led to then more motions and amendments to motions. And I think that was a great experiment in doing that. And so obviously the committee is welcome to make motions at the time. Committee members are welcome to make motions at the time that they would like to do that. I wonder if tonight we might want to try allowing a little bit more discussion on a particular item before we jump into doing a motion, so that perhaps when we get to having a motion it might be something that's closer to where we want to end up rather than kind of the amending process. So again, it's at your discretion. You should do what you feel like you need to do, but just an idea. So before we get any further, I should have started with this, I forgot. We do not have Shauna taking minutes with us this evening. So we are hoping that someone might be willing to take minutes. Herb, are you willing to? Should we provide you with some paper? I have a pad. I put the visitor sign in on it, but you could probably just pull that page off of it and use that. Would you mind doing that?
No, I don't mind.
Okay, thank you so much.
I need a pen. Frankly.
Okay, it looks like you got one. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
It's possible that Shauna is going to come later in the evening, but I'm not sure. So until such time. And again, the essential of the minutes is that we need motions and votes on those motions. Anything beyond that is great and is not required to be recorded. So, all right. So with that, we're going to move to item number 2 on the agenda, which is the public comment. We have a few visitors this evening, and if you, I think, is it Andrew? You had some comments you wanted to share?
Would you like me to go first? Yes, Andrew Furch. I'm a resident of Lincoln here, and I'm also the head and founder of Friends of the Lincoln Community School. And this is
Can I get your last name again?
Yep, it's Furch, F-U-R-T-S-C-H. So we started this, it's a nonprofit organization. We started it about 7 years ago, and we raise money to support enrichment activities here at the Lincoln School. We've been in contact with a group in Moncton. I know there's a group in New Haven. There's the Terry Shattuck Foundation out there. So there's a variety of these groups that are supporting our community schools. What I'm asking this study group to consider, and it's a very specific request, I would like you to ensure that our community schools retain the ability to individually apply for grants. It's a very specific charge here, and I would very much like to see that explicitly stated in the articles of organization so that there's no confusion about this going forward. And I just want to give you 2 examples of things we've done here in Lincoln and just what helps make Lincoln unique, and I think that uniqueness is important to this school and a way for other schools in the community to retain their individual identities. 2 things we funded this year. The first was a Trout in the Classroom program. Some of you might have seen it written up in the Addison Independent. So we got little fish fry and worked with the State Department of Wildlife, and these were raised in the classroom. All sorts of science, ecology, involvement with the New Haven River that runs right through this school, and the New Haven River is an important part of the Lincoln community. These fish were raised till they were a few inches and then released in the New Haven River just a few weeks ago. Incredibly important in the classroom in terms of science, getting kids involved, hands-on learning, experiential learning. It was just a huge success, and given the river running through the school here, perfectly suited and appropriate to the 5th, 6th grade classroom in Lincoln. That was a project we funded. the class, the 5-6 teachers applied for a grant from Friends. We were able to award them the money, and that took place. Another thing we do regularly, it's probably been 4 or 5 years in a row now, maybe more, is a Reichert cross-country ski program. So we're just right across the Ripton Road, and you're at the Breadloaf campus of Middlebury College, and there's a Nordic Center, cross-country skiing, and we fund 3 trips each year for each of the kids in the school. Everyone goes. A couple of different trips. It's broken down by classroom, and they go out to Reichert's. It's a half-day trip, and they ski. There's all sorts of learning that takes place outside of the classroom. Might not be appropriate for a school in Moncton to try and get there. A school in Moncton, I'm just using that as an example, might have a different interest. Maybe they're into their community gardens or who knows. I think it's just really important that these schools maintain the ability to seek outside resources in terms of grants to fulfill whatever it is that they want to. Some of this plays to the strength of the individual faculty. You know, this idea of the child in the classroom was something that the 5-6 teachers here identified that they could get excited about, that their students would get excited about, and seemed perfectly appropriate. So I don't know, and individual schools applying for grants, there's a long history of that happening here at INESU. There's existing policies and procedures around that, and I'm just looking for some assurances that as we move forward in consolidation, that our individual schools are going to retain the ability to do that.
Great, thank you so much for your comments. And I'm not sure how much you've been updated about the workings of this group, but we did have a specific discussion about that. I believe it was 2 meetings ago. And we talked with the interim superintendent, and we actually had a follow-up question and got further information that nothing about the way that the articles are structured, excuse me, to do budgeting across all the schools would affect the PTOs or the similar organizations that provide resources at a specific school, and that there also is nothing that would preclude a school itself for writing a grant. So, you know, you used the example of some of the programs you've done here. We recently, in Moncton, our principal wrote a grant for our garden, and so if a specific school applied for a grant and was able and won that grant for something to happen at that school, there's no reason to believe that that would then be, you know, like we couldn't just decide to give that money to a different school within the district. So we have had some discussion about that. I'm not sure if you are aware of that history.
I did speak to one of the board members from Lincoln, Rebecca, who's not here tonight, about this probably a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So is there anything going to be in your articles of organization just to provide assurances that that will continue to take place? Is it not necessary?
So thank you, Allison. So I think that it's addressed under Article 6, which talks about special funds and debt. Although I will say the discussion that we had as a committee was whether we should have something more specific in there about grants for specific schools. And I think that based on the conversation we had as a committee, we determined at that point that it wasn't necessary to include that because it doesn't change the way that things are now. But I appreciate you bringing the concern, and I don't know if this committee might be interested in discussing that further, but that was the decision that we made a couple weeks ago.
Okay. Well, I'll just reiterate what I said in the beginning. It would be my desire to have something very specific in the articles of organization. I think that would, you know, and just saying that we retain those rights, you know, as individual schools to apply for grants. I fail to see what harm could come from including that, and I think that would let all the schools and all these various groups, I mean, we've been working at this for seven or 8 years, and I would hate to all of a sudden not be able to continue to do what we've been doing here in Lincoln.
Jennifer?
Great.
I have a
Yes,
question
Herb?
for Andrew.
Yes.
When you said you were looking for an express provision such that a school can individually apply for a grant for that school, what did you mean by individually apply?
Well, just
Because there will be.
Does not. I understand that with the consolidation,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense to me that we deal with, you know, school bus contracts at a district
Sure.
level. But I want Lincoln to be able to apply for whatever grants Lincoln wants to be able to apply for, receive those grants, and as we've been doing, and institute those programs. It's if Lincoln wants to apply for a grant for cross-country skiing, I don't want that to have to take place at the district level, and I don't think the other 4 schools in the district necessarily need to go cross-country skiing.
So, Jennifer's right that we had this discussion with the interim superintendent, and they said, nothing's really going to change in terms of if a grant, if some grant funds are going to be allocated to a specific school, that's what happens now, and that can happen in the future.
Well, it's not so much that they're allocated to the school, the school's applying individually.
Yeah, and
right?
so I just wanted to let you know
The
that
allocation is what I'm
there's
worried
a difference between a school applying, or is it the school applying, or is it the supervisory union on behalf of the school? I wasn't clear, frankly, in what Armando was saying about that, because it would seem to me that if you have a central board, the central board and the superintendent's office, hierarchically, they will still have the authority to make decisions about what goes on in the local schools.
So I don't want to speak for Armando, who's not here tonight,
Okay.
but my understanding of that conversation is we talked about both situations of PTOs and similar organizations that are specific to a school, and that nothing about this would impact the ability of those groups to provide services or to pay for things within that school. Right? We also talked about whether individual schools could continue to apply for grants. So today, the central office applies for some kinds of grants, schools apply for other kinds of grants, and that nothing that we are doing would change that. Right? And that's how I remember the discussion. Right? So thank you so much for bringing the concern to the committee. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you for your attention to it.
Is there any other comments? Yes, Tori?
I'd like to just ask a question that you may or may not be willing or able to answer right now. And it also has to do with Article 6. Is anyone able to speak a little bit more about what specific endowments or other restricted accounts would include?
So, I would love to ask Andrew, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if Tori is the principal here in Lincoln. Yeah. Okay, great. So, so that's in the specified funds in Article 6, Section C?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jen?
Yes.
Isn't
Dawn.
that when we spoke about the like Moncton has the Marshall funds that are specific to the Moncton school? They're designated that way in the way they were created. I think that's when we had that part of that discussion about what we're doing isn't going to change anything that's been done. That fund was written specifically for a specific use in a specific school, so I think that's when we had that discussion.
I think that's essentially the answer. Essentially, Section C says if there's an existing fund that says this is to benefit a certain population or do a certain thing, then that is completely unchanged by the fact that the school boards have changed their governance structure.
So what is the part about the first sentence, blah, 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 will transfer to the new UUSD any pre-existing school district specific endowments or other restricted accounts that may exist?
Because the governance structures that exist currently, the Lincoln Elementary School, for example, as a governance structure will cease to exist at some point. So those assets need to be transferred to the new entity. And what this is saying is that whatever those assets were intended for, or were specified for, would continue to be honored by the new district.
So I'm sure I'm about to step out of line, but I'll just give it a shot. I have a suggestion that the second sentence, the scholarship funds or like accounts, when I read that, because the language is different than the sentence above with specific endowments or other restricted accounts, it sounds like it's talking about two different things. So I was confused. I felt like what was in the first sentence was going to be transferred, and what was in the second sentence was going to stay within the control of the school.
So these are two different groups of things. The operating fund and surpluses and deficits are really school-specific accounts. Any debts that you have, any of these actual school accounts that are part of your tax money, for lack of a better way to put that. Whereas the specified funds are more likely going to be grants or things that were donated to the school. these, we have attorneys that look at all of this and tell us the way they should be worded. So we can certainly raise those questions, but I have a very high degree of confidence that the language in here addresses those. Like most issues related to the merger, things that are happening currently will continue to happen after the merger.
So I would just think, I understand the difference between B and C. I think within C, there's some conflicting and confusing language. So I'm just asking that that can be reviewed further.
Thank you, Tori. I would love to make a note of that when these go to the lawyer for review, because that's probably the best authority on that.
Jennifer?
Yes, Herb?
I have a suggestion. You're probably thinking of a specific fund, and it would be helpful, I think, to have the specifics of that fund in terms of what it is. You know, is it part of the school funding mechanism? Is it a separate fund? You know, what conditions have been placed on it? Because the lawyer that Andrew refers to is going to need, I would think he or she is going to need to know those specifics in order to make a judgment about, you know, what the effect of this language is going to be.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that, thank you.
Great. Nancy?
I think in addition to what Tori has said about that 6C, you know, it really restricts itself to things that happened before June 30th, 2018. And in the way it's written, it doesn't speak at all to what may happen after that. And that may not be our intent as a group.
Great. So I would love to, if we need to revisit Article 6, I would love to wait until we're talking about the articles if we have new concerns based on the comments that have been raised. Right now, I just want to make sure that we've finished with any visitor and public comments. I can't see you guys. Do you guys have anything else you want to bring up at this point? Andy, you good?
I'm set.
For myself, just last time I expressed the concern about the minutes and stuff, and Allison made arrangements for me to get the stuff directly, and so I'm all, I mean, not that that still wouldn't be in it, but that happens periodically, and I understand that, but I hadn't made that arrangement myself, so I appreciate it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I did see that the minutes were up on the website.
Yeah,
So that situation was resolved. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Quick comment, I just want to respond. I've been a part of too many processes where great staffs, great lawyers have made tremendously phenomenal mistakes that we've all not recognized because we trusted the lawyers. So I hope when,
Oh, we're going fast.
or we're going too fast, like the other.
Well, you are going to.
Yeah.
Can we just have one comment, please?
So,
at a time? Thanks.
I hope that when we have an opportunity to engage with a lawyer, and costs may be prohibitive about this, but I think it would be good for there to be an opportunity for us to ask directly some of these questions. I mean, people are bringing up good issues, and I want to make sure that we not trust that the legal work that's been done in the past is accurate, that we make sure it's right for us.
Great, so I'm gonna make a note of that under other, because I would be interested in having the committee determine if that's something that the committee as a whole would be interested in pursuing. I assume that would mean that we would need to schedule an additional meeting, at which time when we could have the lawyer present to review the articles in the report and ask specific questions. I'm not sure how that would line up, whether that would be kind of after we get the comments back or ahead of that. Sorry, most of the seats are on that side of the table, just to make it difficult. So I'm gonna try to move on to the next point on the agenda. Nancy, do you have a short comment?
Yes, I just wonder when we're going to be talking about choosing an attorney. And we don't have to talk about that now. Maybe we could put that under other.
Yep, great. I realize I did not add that to the agenda. We do have information available so that we could have some discussion about that tonight when we reach other. Great. Okay, excellent. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 3. Hi, Ari. Welcome. I I just want to let you know, you were just closing the public comment portion of the meeting, and so not to put you on the spot as you're walking in, but were you coming because you had a public comment to share with the...
No, I was coming in place of Rebecca,
Oh,
but I was
awesome.
the ANSU calendar says this meeting starts at 6:30.
Oh, well, welcome.
So if we were hoping to get visitor business, that might be a problem.
I regret that that was not correct on the calendar. I think that the agenda did have the 6 p.m. time. We have been finding that we have so much work to do that we have been very dynamic in our meeting scheduling. And so
Sure.
I regret that that was confusing.
No,
So we'll-
I totally understand. However, for the public, if you're hoping for them to come, there's no way for them to get an agenda. Is there?
Well, it would be posted on, it should be posted on the website. I can't say that
Okay.
I was on there today. I know as of last Friday, we had confirmed that some things that were not there had been updated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Thanks
I'm
for
late.
the point. No,
Sorry, I'm late.
I'm glad you're here. Did you get the agenda, Ari? The agenda packet?
I can get access to it
Okay, great.
home. We have it.
So Ari, so Rebecca had let me know that she's not gonna be able to be at all the meetings due to her travel schedule, that sometimes other board members from Lincoln would be attending. So the understanding is that, Ari or others from Lincoln board would be able to participate in any discussion and
Yeah.
bring back updates, but that they would not be a voting member
So,
of
so
the
I'm supposed to
committee.
be taking minutes. I'm afraid I don't know your last name. Everybody else seems to know you.
It's okay. It's Kirschenbaum.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to spell that? Because I didn't learn how to spell it till I got to high
That's
school.
Thank you.
I think I got it after about a year of taking minutes for the SU board, so. Thank you for being here. So we were just moving to agenda item number 3 to approve the meeting minutes from 6/1. Those were included in the packet. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from 6/1.
Thank you. Seconded by Kate. Herb, just let me know at any point if you need us to pause to, thank you.
Oh, I might not be able to read them, but I'm fast.
As long as you can get them into the computer and to Karen in the next like 24 to 48 hours, you're all good.
That would be if I'm cross-examining, but I'm not, so.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Is there any discussion? And I'm gonna take a moment and take an official count so that we establish what our 2/3 majority is for the moment. We've had numbers change, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 voting committee members this evening. So that means that our 2/3 majority will be 8. So all those in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hand. Okay, and Herb, are you voting yes or are you voting yes?
I
I
raised
realize
my
it's
hand.
hard to
There we go. I'll
write
keep
and
it up.
raise your hand, so it's a unanimous,
Unanimous vote.
it's a unanimous vote, thank you. Didn't want to say that if it wasn't true. Okay, excellent, so we're gonna move on to our agenda item number 4, drafting articles for the Union District and finalizing the articles. So, as we move into this, I just wanted to point out, I optimistically gave us an hour and a half of tonight's agenda to work on the articles. We do need to save a significant chunk of time tonight to talk about the report, which is why there is a split in that time. So we need to go ahead and work through the items that we still have to discuss. The most current version of the articles are included in your packet. And I'm just flipping to those now. So I have in front of me. I also updated the summary page about the status of the different articles to have that handy. At the end of the last meeting, we had a motion on the table about the community relationships, and thankfully we have some minutes that tell us exactly what that was. We voted to postpone consideration of that motion, so I believe procedurally that should be where we start tonight, since we postponed consideration, so,
Can I ask,
Yes.
was the mover and the second noted in the minutes?
yes.
Okay.
So Allison had made that motion to
Okay.
create Article 15, well,
Okay.
it's in the 6/1 minutes
Okay,
that we
great.
just
Thank
approved,
you.
yeah. So I don't think you need to capture that again.
Just wanted to know if needed to.
So this is the top
So-
of page 11.
The motion itself is on page 4 of the minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Page 4 of the minutes, so, Allison,
I withdraw my motion. Is that
Okay.
procedurally allowed?
I don't see why not.
Secondary agrees.
Does the second agree?
Who was the second?
Dawn?
Great, I think that makes sense. I believe that we had some, you sent some new language which was included in the packet, so that probably, that would allow some discussion of the new language. So, motion or no motion on the table, we're gonna talk about community relationships next. And so that was on, I think someone said page 11, page 11 overall. Page 11 on the numbers on the bottom of the pages of the packet. If you're looking at it electronically, I apologize, those numbers don't match up, just to keep you guessing. But it's on the page that looks like this, that says Articles of Agreement Proposed Language. Ellen, do you have what you need over there?
She can look on me until she finds
Okay.
hers.
I might have a different when I print it out.
We
My
sent you
numbers
a
are on
lot
the
of
bottom.
stuff over the last few days, so,
Okay, all right. Thanks,
are you okay looking on?
if you don't mind.
Not
Thanks.
at all.
Okay, great. So we're at the top of the page that says Articles of Agreement Proposed Language. It is numbered 11 at the bottom of the page. It starts with community relationships, so I think that Allison had made some revisions to what was presented last time. Do you wanna, would you like to discuss anything related to this language before we open it up?
I just wanted to make it clearer, to the people reading the article that, it provides stronger language for the new board to actually consider, structures, committees, and/or councils to be established by the, on or before June 30th, 2018, in a manner that doesn't constrain their ability to respond to any future occurrences.
Great, any discussion, or,
I need to,
okay, take a moment and read.
thank you.
So as you all are reading, I'd also like to point out that following that language that Allison mentioned, which a version of that was in the motion last time, we also have the language that Nancy, I think, talked about some last week related to community engagement and input. Nancy, do you have anything new you want to add on that in addition to the discussion we had last week?
No.
Okay, great, thank you.
But we're just voting on the first.
So at this point, there's no motion on the table
Okay.
because Allison withdrew her motion,
Okay.
right? So at this point, I would love to encourage the committee to work towards a sense of what we might find to be our important priorities related to community engagements if we feel that we want to add a article about that. Steve?
Yeah, I do. I mean, well, I guess I have two things that I want to voice, and one of them is, in terms of the language that Allison has been kind enough to generate. When I get down into the local school councils or school advisory committees, I get to a place about a third of the way through that. This is under B, where I'm like, I'm a little bit in the weeds. It's a little bit too much specific when trying to lay out what that board's gonna look like. I'm not sure that at this time, and in terms of what we're writing for articles, that I need to get down into exactly what that board's gonna look like. That's one comment, and I just make it as a comment. The second one is that at our previous meeting, Mike Fisher had a motion about whether or not we wanted to continue to discuss in the community engagement and input, if I remember right, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, whether we wanted to continue to think of that as being an elected position. And what I remembered was that we didn't, as a committee, want to do that. And I wondered if Nancy et al. Would like us to consider some of her language, which I think is good, without the language that includes those boards as being elected.
Any comments? Nancy?
Yeah, I was just looking back. Mike's motion was to have continued conversation about elected local councils,
Right.
and that failed. I don't, first of all, think that precludes ever having a conversation about it. I thought it only pertained to our last meeting, but I could be wrong about that. I guess I want to just say again that I think that having the council be elected is important because it ensures that people not only feel they have a voice, but actually have one. And so, and that seems very important given the vastly fewer number of elected board members who will be representing people in our 5 towns.
Great. So,
But again, I'd like to say that I see, you know, as is written in what we wrote, the purpose of the school councils is purely advisory, and purely but necessarily advisory on 2 key issues: the hiring of a principal and establishing a draft budget before it moves on to the Unified Union Board for ultimate approval.
So I'd love to just share what my perspective was of that motion that happened last time. So my understanding was that that this committee does not have a majority of members who are interested in continuing to discuss those local councils being elected. So I did not understand that to be just for that one meeting.
Okay.
I believe that that was a decision about not having the local councils be elected. However, I don't think that precludes any further discussion about local councils, just I believe that we have decided not to pursue those being elected. Steve, you don't have your hand up, but you're talking, so I assume you'd like to be recognized.
Well, I mean, if there's any confusion about that, I think now is the time to go ahead and Mike, I'm sorry. No, now would be the time, or a time, to clear that up rather than continuing to discuss it. I'm not sure what the motion would look like, but it would seem like we could have a motion on the floor.
I wonder if we might just be able to take a straw poll of how many people understood that when they voted for that motion, that they were saying in general, not just for the meeting. But Mike?
I think both are correct, Nancy and Jen, that anybody can offer a motion at any time as a member of this committee. I saw the motion and the vote to be a clear indication that the majority is not interested in doing that at that meeting and at future meetings. So I don't see any value.
Okay,
I think we've been
thank you.
clear. I think the committee's been clear. I happen to be in disagreement with it, but I don't have any need to discuss it any further. I think the majority of the committee's been very clear that the majority of the committee is not interested in elected local councils. So,
Great, thank you.
from my perspective, that's been,
Thank you, Mike, for clarifying that. Oh, sorry, you weren't done.
but then I was gonna go back to this topic.
Great.
I guess I'm challenged by knowing how to, I want to make our words be crisp and clear and be easy to understand. And I left that page so I can't, I have struggled, to be honest, with words that this committee wrote a while ago about our committee charge. And number 4 on that charge that says, I won't read it, that I thought it was pretty clear, and yet I think we could probably dispute what it means today, even though we wrote it and it was not too long ago. And so when I go to the language here, and it says things that
Can you tell us where
let me
you
find it.
are? Okay.
So in the second paragraph,
Are you in the language Allison?
in Allison's language, the school directors shall provide opportunities for local input on school policy and local boards. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that means. For most people, it might mean that they have a warned meeting and discuss it publicly, like they have to do for anything. And so that language doesn't do much for me. If, on the other hand, the majority of the committee is interested in having explicitly a directive about the kind of engagement that we want the board to have with the communities, I'd love to have that conversation. And I think it's an important conversation around budget development and around school policies. So I'm a little stuck because I don't know exactly where to go with that.
Great. Allison?
So in response to Mike's query, I guess, I'm offering an opportunity for the new board to determine the opportunities for local input on policy in local schools. They will need to establish structures and in that come up with ways of providing input. But it's up to the new board to determine how they're going to do that. That's not our charge to prescribe to them what they're supposed to do. And in terms of creating a budget, I went through the state education statutes this weekend, and the powers of school boards, Title 16, Chapter 9, Subchapter 01A, Subsection 563, Power of School Boards. 11A states, powers of school boards. The school board of a school district, in addition to other duties and authorities specifically assigned by law, shall prepare and distribute annually a proposed budget for the next school year according to such major categories as may from time to time be prescribed by the secretary. So it's up to the board to determine the budget. It's in state statute. So I think for us to prescribe on the new board how they should go about putting together the new budget oversteps our charge. Because it's in state statute and it's up to the new board to determine how they're going to do these things going forward.
Great. I want to add one other comment, and I'm going to come to you next, right? But so because we haven't always been able to have Armando with us, I did check in with both Armando and Howard since our last meeting, because there was some short discussion about the possibility of having budgets presented on a school-by-school basis in this new model. And so they both strongly recommended against prescribing that way of presenting the budgets. I know Howard's comment was that it would actually pretty much eliminate any cost savings that would come from doing a consolidated budget to then have that available to be presented out to the voters as a budget for each individual school. So that would significantly add to any of the time savings that we would be looking at. And I know Armando talked about in some areas the ways that they're able to establish those budgets where there's more of like kind of, it's a little bit more formulaic, but then looking at special needs of this within the schools, or special, you know, like this school might need more funding for this year or something like that. So obviously the needs of each building is factored into forming that larger budget, but that it's not, you know, it really, once it's built, it doesn't really exist as a separate school budget that can be presented efficient. I mean, obviously it could be, but it would require significant extra work to do that. So I just wanted to share those perspectives since they're not here. So Mike?
Sorry, just a basic difference of opinion between Allison and I on this in terms of our job here. You know, this committee is presenting something to the public and saying, we want you to depart from your old governance structure and how you run your schools and join this new one. So on two levels, one of them being, I think for the purposes of attempting to get a positive vote, which I assume the committee wants, we're going to have to entertain satisfying concerns, like somebody who says, you know, I don't see grants here, and I know from experience confusion leads to no votes. That's on the one level. On the second level, it is our opportunity, well-meaning public officials under fire do the best they can, and I don't fault them because I've been there. And you need a rule book. And it's our opportunity to be a part of setting that rule book for our district. And I think that's, for me, I see that as very much a part of my job here, especially, you know, I'm thinking about public engagement with this topic. You know.
Great, thanks Mike. I'd love to hear from some other committee members. You don't have any other? Nancy, then Andrew?
Well, on the subject of budgets, I just want to say that it's hard to imagine how a unified union budget could be created and developed by the superintendent and the principals without first considering the needs of each individual school budgetarily. So it's hard. I know that presenting budgets both ways, as all commingled and separately, is a bit more work, but I don't think it means double work, because I think the school-based part and the SU part, the superintendent's office part, would have to be done anyway to create the commingled version. So I just think that if we allow voters to see the budgets in both forms, it'll help them be comfortable with and help them understand what they're voting on. If they only see a commingled budget, it's going to look monolithic and possibly convince them that they should not support it. And that would be bad for kids.
Andrew?
Thank you. So we're talking about community relationships, and this is obviously very important. And I think might get at a couple of different ways that we need to talk to the public about what this merger could mean. And I think one of the most important ways that we can do that is when we talk to the public, to be reassuring that school boards make reasonable decisions, that there are statutes and law that aren't changing because we've changed our structure. And I also think it's important to say something in our documents about that. But there's a danger if you're too specific about what that needs to look like, that either you're really directing this new board to do things in a way that may not make sense in the future, or that you have something in the language that causes them problems because it's there. So I think I like the beginning section of Allison's language that talks about how important it is. But I think that I would recommend that we stay away from too much specificity in terms of what that's going to look like. Because I don't think that's really the place for this committee. That's the place for the new board to figure out how to best do those things. Thank you.
Great, Steve?
So I have a couple of comments. One is about separate school budgets. When I start thinking about budgets, separate school budgets, I get some of the what is currently in our separate school budgets is going to disappear, if you will. The individual debt servicing of a school is going to disappear. To some extent, the maintenance of that school kind of disappears because it's that has been taken over. Same with transportation. Same with food. There's a lot of parts of the Moncton Central School budget that won't exist as a separate budget anymore. That's not to say that there aren't things to discuss under the budget, and I'm, and most of what I know in Moncton that we talk about is how are our teachers allocated? Do we need a behavioral specialist? These are the kinds of things that are important to communities and are important that I think are things where a local school council, school advisory committee, however we want to think about them, I don't think that we need to say there must be such. I think my thought here is that we can make advisory comments like local school councils maybe, there are two issues, and I think that Nancy has correctly pointed them out. The hiring of a principal of a school, and I don't know if it's budget or something else that communities really care about, and they should at least get a chance to have their input heard. I don't have specific language that I'm willing to propose at this time.
And I guess I would love to just challenge, seeing no hands, that, we just hired a principal in Moncton last year, and we had a principal search committee, and we involved community members and staff members and board members, and we don't have it in our ends policy that we're gonna do that.
Right.
But we did that because that's a good way to hire a principal. So I think that I would challenge us to balance the kinds of things we need to dictate, thou shalt always do this way, versus the things that, if we didn't do that, what would probably happen is we would probably have a lot of angry people coming in and yelling at the school board and saying, what do you mean you're gonna hire a principal without some input? So, I don't wanna minimize that, and it may be that we need to have an article that addresses this. And, a lot of these things are happening now without a specific, governance document that requires them to happen. So, all right, I'm done on the soapbox. Ellen.
I think that I have, go to 3 or 4 school board meetings a week now, and they're all about pre-decisional input and how we are going to keep that on the front burner, and it's absolutely something we want here. But I really don't think we want to prescribe it, and I think, when I think of how I want the budget presentation to change, I want the budget to align with our ends, not with the schools. I'm not sure how that's going to happen, and maybe it's a pipe dream that we're going to be able to say, we want to stress global engagement, and here's the funding we're putting towards it. So I just don't want to prescribe where it's going to go.
Sarah.
I guess I might be on the total other end of some of these comments, but when I read June 30th, 2018, I was like, oh my gosh, so you have to have decided all of your committees by that date. You don't know what's going to have come up yet. So I was almost against, I think it's nice for them to come up with a process for creating committees when it needs to be, by that date, but I actually felt like it was almost more limited if we had it as a certain date. I don't know.
Great, Ed?
I've had to write some notes down to get all my thoughts in order, but going all the way back to your opening comments about motions, and I've become persuaded that heading right to a motion, and I'm one of the most guilty of this, forms a kind of brinksmanship and shuts down the opportunities for middle ground to be discovered. So I'm glad we're doing it slightly differently tonight. On the regarding advisory bodies to the school board, I picture a school board that we have elected who we expect will interact with the superintendent directly, closely, frequently, and it's a very simple structure. And that everything about it is performance-based, that if I in the community don't particularly like the way my school has been treated in the budget or some other process, I know exactly where to go to be heard, and I can take my friends with me. I know I will be heard. And setting up other structures that would dilute that channel, I think, is not in my best interest as a citizen of a community. If, as a member of a community, I want an advisory group to be assembled, I can assemble it. We'll get it together and form like Lincoln has and other towns now have. And elected or not, their voices are heard and paid attention to, and the boards that hear them, if they don't agree with them, better have a good reason not to agree with them. So I'm inclined to allow the community to develop these avenues to reach the board and keep the board simple, straightforward, give them a charge that's clear, and insist that they represent both their hometown and school and all 5 towns as a total.
Great, Nancy?
The language on page 11 that starts the second to the last paragraph, the Unified District Board, is language from the Rutland Northeast Articles of Agreement, which were approved, and that's actually that's the long and short of what's in their Articles of Agreement. Back in February, I emailed Jean Collins, the superintendent, who's a friend and colleague of mine, and asked her about that language and what they were thinking about it. And here's what she wrote back to me.
Nancy, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, and I would love to hear that. I just want to understand, do you mean just that paragraph, or do you mean that whole section?
I mean just that paragraph.
Okay, thank you. That just helps me
Yep.
hear the comments.
She said, the new board, which has not yet met, will need to figure out if they want to go beyond the board meetings and hold community forums. I recommend they do during budget development process and at other times. I also plan to propose a public access TV show so the process is accessible to everyone, which it is apparently in Rutland Northeast and isn't in RSU. However, I can't fully answer your question as the new board does not sit until March 31st and beyond, and thus has not discussed this yet. Those are ideas I have. Another idea is to have school-based budget advisory committees.
I'm sorry, what is to have who, what?
Another idea that she was putting forward was to have school-based budget advisory committees.
Okay.
So I guess with that in mind, and in the interest of all the talk we've heard at the table of not tying the new board's hand, and in light of the fact that the group is not interested at all in an elected school council, I suggest we just use that language that's the second to the last paragraph.
Which starts with what words?
The Unified District Board shall provide timely and sufficient opportunity for local input on policy and budget development, structures to support and encourage public participation within the Unified District will be established by the Unified District Board of School Directors on or before June 30th of the first full year of operation. So the board would be in operation for a year and have a chance and be required to make a plan about that.
So Nancy, do you want to phrase that as a motion, or was that just a comment?
It's just a comment.
Allison?
I make a motion that we make community engagement input an article to be numbered and read as follows. The Unified District Board shall provide timely and sufficient opportunity for local input on policy and budget development. Structures to support and encourage public participation within the Unified District will be established by the Unified District Board of School Directors on or before June 30 of the first full year of operation.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ed? Excellent. Herb, I know that was long. It's
It's verbatim, it's Nancy's first
Yeah.
paragraph.
great.
It's the first paragraph of Nancy's
Community engagement.
At all.
Community, yep, community engagement and input.
Great. Is there any further discussion? Herb?
So, just going back to a few minutes ago, when you wanted to make sure that other people had an opportunity to speak first. I had a question for Steve. You can answer later, but if it's not elected, it's got to be appointed, and who's going to appoint might make a difference in terms of it actually being a meaningful opportunity for community engagement. Allison, you cited the statute in terms of the budget, and it's quite obvious that the board itself must establish the budget and vote on it. What we're talking about here is what procedures and processes that are used before the board votes on the budget. So I don't think my sense is you were saying that a lot of Nancy's material was prohibited by law, and I don't think that's correct. The bigger picture, I think, is I'm reminded of what Andrew Letourneau said. I think it was in Starksburg, and he questioned, just how much actual community input people were interested in receiving. You can say you want community input, but if you really want meaningful community input, you have to have some way to empower those folks in the community when they speak about the budget or the principal. If you don't, you're not going to get very many people talking about it, and they're not going to say much. I think it's fine. I don't have any problem per se with that particular paragraph. I don't think that it really does provide an opportunity for meaningful public input because it doesn't have any stature. It doesn't have any. There's no reason why anyone will need to pay any attention. There's also no reason for community members to provide their input. So I think that's fine, but it is definitely not sufficient. And if the intent of the mover of this paragraph is that that is all that should be placed in the Articles of Agreement around community participation or relationships, that's not something I agree with.
So that's my understanding of the intent of the motion, was that would be the article that would be added. Allison?
And I did that motion based on the comments that Nancy had just made prior to that.
Great. Is there any further discussion of the motion before we move to a vote? Mike?
I just want to say publicly before voting that I don't, I echo some of what Herb just said, so I won't need to say it. Not sufficient. I don't disagree with any of the words on this paragraph. I disagree with what's missing from it, and therefore I plan to vote no.
Nancy?
Is the intent of the motion that this would be the entirety of the article? It is?
Allison, would you?
Yes, because I based it on what you had just said prior to making the motion.
And I would say, I think we heard several suggestions or comments from the committee that indicated that people were thinking that they were interested in having an article about community engagement that left more leeway for the board to define what those structures would look like. Great, so seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Are you counting for me?
I'm
love-
sorry?
No, it's okay.
Go right ahead, Jennifer.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
You
6.
give me the numbers.
So that's 6 in favor. All those opposed? Okay, that's 4 opposed. And since we currently have 11 members here, we need 8 for a 2/3 majority, so the motion does not carry. So,
Can I ask, who in the, okay, I saw these 3. Who
you
was the
don't need to
vote?
record who voted against. You only need to record the
I'm just
counts.
saying, I was just asking, Jennifer.
Okay,
wanted
that's
to
fine.
know. I
You're
didn't
welcome
see
to
it.
ask, but it's
I
not,
know
it doesn't
that.
need to be recorded.
I knew that.
Great. So, so we then still need to continue working on an agreement about what we'd like. I suppose there is the possibility that the committee would not like to include an article about community relationships, although I don't get the sense that's where we'd like to go. I do want to be very clear with the committee that my expectation is that we will be final or very this close to final on the articles when we leave here tonight. And we will also be discussing the report. So we still have a lot of ground to cover. So what would you guys like to do with just the community relationships? Does someone who voted against the motion have a different proposal that might be more favorable to a larger number of the committee members? Mike?
Raking my brain, trying to figure out how, I mean, I think that it's an interesting divide in the committee. I don't.
So I have, maybe I can just say, I have the sense that several of you sitting in the vicinity of Mike expressed that, and I don't mean that, but I mean, you expressed concern that you believe that article should contain more information. So presumably that would be one way that the committee could go, although we've heard others voice against that. So, Elin.
Can I ask a question? I don't understand if we have the power to suggest that this new school board do something, and that new school board is gonna have the power to decide who they wanna talk to and who they wanna react with. But I don't see how we have the power to tell a town that they can elect a committee or not elect a committee. Or elect people to whatever they want to elect people to. So if a town has a PTO and they decide they want to, can't they decide that they want to elect people to that? I'm just curious. I don't see how what we decide here keeps a town, what we decide here might force towns to do something, but I don't see how what we decide here is keeping a town from doing something. Possibly, and I don't see, I hope that our principals and our superintendent and our school board have enough to talk to people who are invested and willing and doing something. So I'm just curious, not knowing anything about town government and how it works. Can't a town elect people to do things as they wish?
And I might add to that, Elin, we had some discussion, and I think Steve made some comments last meeting about whether this committee could create new elected towns in, or elected positions in a town, and that's also very unclear. Mike?
I don't think we have the power to do anything but decide what the voters vote to do. The voters have the power to accept this or not. We don't.
No, separate from this, separate from all of this. We vote on all of this, and in 2 years, Bristol says, we want to have a committee that talks about the school.
But it's
they
not-
won't have any power, but why couldn't we vote people, if we as Bristol members want to vote people onto something that talks about that, that's on a PTO or something, why couldn't we do that?
So
Yeah, I don't know if that's a question that we can answer within this group, but
Just to
I think
say-
it's an interesting
I think it's
perspective,
an important
Mike.
point to just say again, all we get to do is frame something that the voters get to vote yes or no on. That's all we get to do here. So we're not
General.
deciding anything, we're proposing something to the voters,
Right.
who get to decide.
Ari, did you want to make a comment?
I did, but Nancy had her hand raised first, so.
We haven't heard from you yet tonight, so it'd be lovely to hear from you.
I want to apologize if I'm covering ground that you have covered in other meetings.
No problem.
But I'm having a hard time understanding whether the conflict that I'm seeing here is a result of a disagreement about the language or disagreement about the intention of the article. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer, don't want to have anything to do with that, but it seems to me that our current problems in dealing with the Constitution, and that's what we are creating here essentially is a Constitution, have to do with trying to understand the intentions of the writers of that document. I'm wondering if there's not a way that we could write these articles in a manner that reflects our intention very explicitly without any specific recommendations, and that way we can be less concerned about the wording, as long as the wording reflects our intentions accurately. So again, I apologize if that's something you've already covered.
No, that's a great addition. And I wonder, do you have a suggestion, not to put you on the spot or anything, for this article, how you might see that?
Well,
coming together?
I have to admit that I don't fully understand the differences in opinion here regarding what the intention of the article. I think that it is part of what we were reading before, and B, that was written by Allison, that it seemed that there was a gesture to trying to maintain some of our current local school board structure in this new greater supervisory union board. Now, if that's the case, and we want to maintain, give that there's that with this community engagement input, as Nancy has attempted to rewrite it and introduce, I think some pretty helpful language about giving us the opportunity to address it in a timely fashion. I think maybe there's something we can say is it is the intention of the board that this is really going to be a local governance issue, and that as long as they meet some sort of timely appeal and this whole process, that how towns decide to do it should be up to them. This is the intention without any specific guidance. I don't know if that's something that would work.
Thanks, Ari. Nancy?
I think that's a really interesting idea, that it would be the town that establishes a school council. And in light of what Superintendent Collins was saying, I wonder, and in light of, it has seemed over time that this group is quite opposed to the idea of elected members of a school council, although I must say I don't quite understand the reasoning behind that. But I wonder if we might agree on language that that calls for a town to appoint a school-based council for the elementary schools only, because I think really the Unified Union Board is essentially analogous to the current Mount Abraham Board in many ways, although it has much expanded responsibility. Anyway, school-based councils appointed by the town that have advisory responsibility in the area of budgeting and the hiring of a principal, and leave it at that.
Could you say it again?
So the language that that would start with the language that Allison's motion suggested, and then would continue on by saying something along the lines of each town, and I don't know about the timing of this, so we need to think about that together. Each town will appoint members of a school council with advisory responsibility in relation to budgeting and the hiring of a principal.
Just a second.
Yeah, I'm writing too. Hold on.
Budget and hiring of principal. Now, did you say will or must or may?
We'll have, each
She
town.
said will. I
I
don't know
know
if that's what you
will.
meant to say.
Okay.
Yes, will.
It's ambiguous.
School-based council which will have advisory responsibility in the areas of budgeting and budgeting for the school and the hiring of a principal.
And I think if we can, again, try to focus on the intentions, you know,
So,
the will
right,
or the
so-
may or the, you know, as long as we understand what the intention of it is. And so I understand that what your suggestion, and I see lots of hands, and I promise I will call on everyone, but that your intention is that the town will be required to appoint such a council that would have advisory responsibilities. Is that-
Yes.
Yes.
And that council is not elected.
Okay, great. I think I saw Sarah
So
and, yeah, Sarah.
my point was, what happens if your town school gets closed? And now you're not part of that.
Interesting
I just
comment.
want to throw that out there, because you don't know. It's unforeseen.
Well, if you're-
Kate, did you have your hand up?
I did, and my thoughts are not complete, but the reason I did not vote to accept the motion was because I didn't think it was complete enough to satisfy some concerns of the community, and I just have to say that we are eliminating local school boards, and that's a big deal, so I wasn't fully comfortable with just saying, maybe they will, maybe they can, maybe they, should in the future. I just want it to be a little bit more of a, I don't know, more defined.
More defined. Great, thank you. Steve and then Ed?
So I have a huge problem with the will. A may would be fine with me. Will is completely a no-go. You are in this document forcing individual towns to do something that they may or may not see fit. By the way, I remember as part of the community, our public comment, we had some very good comments about how the Friends of Lincoln School works. And they work very effectively. Eric can, I'm sure, tell us better than I can express. But I think that they do a very good job in terms of making sure that the Lincoln Community School works in the best interests of the community as a whole. It's not clear to me that forcing local engagement is quite the way we want to go. Allowing local community engagement, I think, is great and exactly what we want to do. So.
Great, thank you. Ed?
I'm trying to picture the mechanics of a advisory loop. It would start with the board appointing a group who has emerged from the community to function as an advisory group.
I'm sorry, Ed, can I interrupt you because this is totally obnoxious, but I believe Nancy's statement was that the town would appoint, not the board.
I missed it. Okay. All right, the town would appoint. That would work better. But then, how do they express their advice? Do they come to a board meeting? Let's say it's New Haven night at the board, and the group comes. Or I guess it could be a written report, written advice. And they would gather it in. Let's say it's budget time, and they're gathering in advice from all the towns, from those groups. And then the board considers it. Do we go any further in this discussion, or does it stop there?
So I see we've got some hands up. And I'm sorry, Tori, you can totally decline to say, make any comments, but I'm thinking we're so fortunate we actually have a building principal here with us tonight, so please feel free to say, I don't feel comfortable commenting. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts whatsoever about, you know, the possible benefits or challenges of having a local advisory council. And again, feel free to decline if you don't feel comfortable answering. Or if you want
Thank
to
you,
give me
Tori.
5 minutes to come back to you, that's okay too.
Well, I'm inclined to have provisions for community members to have input in a way that doesn't allow either the community or the administrative / governing structure to wiggle out of that opportunity. I think that we just went through a few years of experiencing some leadership under the very same governance structure that we had had for any number of years, and things went awry pretty badly. So to me, it's important to have language that is loose enough to provide opportunity, tight enough to not allow people to escape their responsibility to allow people to both contribute and belong in a community. And I think really more than anything, we need all to have courage to hold one another accountable. So I think that if we have the perfect language, I do happen to think the language is important ultimately, not necessarily right now in this moment to get it perfect, but I do think it's important so that the interpretation doesn't allow people to abdicate their responsibility no matter what role they have in a community. And then given that, I think having people who are willing and able to perform in an advisory role would be great. And as a principal, I can also take advice or leave the advice. But I always appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tori. I appreciate your willingness to share your perspective. So Dawn, I know you were waiting. Thanks for being patient.
Well, I'm just thinking of our current situation that we are embarked along this path of the RBOs in the board world. So our relationship by objectives, and we have these sort of work groups out there doing work, but they have they sort of have a way back to the board through their board members, and how we're learning this process to use that process, and it's sort of the same idea, advisory. These RBO committees don't have any power to tell anybody what to do. They come with recommendations, and one of them's going to come to the boards and present, kind of thing. So the system can work with the advisory, but I don't know that I would limit it to specifics. That worries me. That if you're so specific, you might, without meaning to, cut something else out. That an advisory committee could be helpful to a building principal or something. So I'm just thinking about it in terms of the RBO, that we're sort of entering into this world of, some recommendations from outside groups and how we're going to deal with them moving forward. So I sort of want to throw something out, but I don't want to throw it out as a motion. I just want to see if this is an idea. So if we took that first paragraph, the Unified District Board, that one that just failed, if we took that and then we added the piece about community connections up from the top of the page, that next paragraph, community connections to local schools are highly valued. Then we express our feelings to that future board about how important we really think this is. And that opens the door for them to figure out how to do it. And then if we added after that, or the last sentence, town-appointed local school councils or school advisory committees may be considered whose purpose is to serve as building-based councils or teams that operate in an advisory capacity, and leave it. Does that bring us closer together?
And I just want to be clear, and I'm gonna have to get that whole language from you should it pass, so when you talked about taking the first paragraph about the community, when you said the community connections to local school are highly valued, would it be that whole paragraph or just that sentence?
If we take that whole paragraph as the second paragraph, and then either add in the sort of the first line of B, but make sure that we say that it's town appointed.
Oh, I see, the first sentence in B?
Well, it just up to the advisory capacity, and then leave it at that. Then we don't tell them what they have to advise on, but that they can be used in advisory capacity. Does that bring us closer to the middle?
I saw a few nods. Ari?
I just have a clarifying question. Are the concerns here that the local school is not going to be seeking advice when it should, or are the concerns here that there's not going to be enough of an advocacy group to support the needs of the local school at the greater school, at the district level? What are the concerns?
Yes.
Yes, both are the concerns? Okay.
I'll speak for myself only, and my concern has to do with making sure that the community school connection is preserved. And I fear that once you move to a central board and you don't have a locally based board, that's going to be diminished. I'm not saying it's going to be lost. You can do things right, but you can also do things wrong. So this would be the purpose for my mind is making sure that there will always be some real meaningful opportunity for community, local town community engagement. That's just me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but if it is both, I'm sorry to speak out of turn, but if it is both, then maybe we're trying to accomplish too much with one agreement here, right? Maybe we need to construct these things in more piecemeal so that we have local community engagement at the school to advise the principal, if that's what we're looking for, and then we also have the opportunity for an advocacy group for the school at the greater district office. I'm sorry, I feel like a derailed, but
No, it's, I guess, well, all right, other people have their hands up. I won't share my opinion. Go ahead, and then Elin.
Like Dawn's suggestion to somehow get pieced together in a way I can hear it all at one time.
You would like to hear it all at one time? Or you liked hearing it all at one? I'm not sure, are you asking for it to be read?
I would like to hear the whole thing as
I think I
potential
have it. Do
motions.
you want me to try?
I have it too. So.
Elin, do you mind waiting on your comment? Okay, so this is good because then Dawn, you can tell me if I wrote it down right. So
Okay.
the first paragraph is the paragraph underneath community engagement and input, Nancy Cornell et al. So the Unified District Board shall provide timely and sufficient opportunity for local input on policy and budget development. Structures to support and encourage public participation within the Unified District will be established by the Unified District Board of School Directors on or before June 30th of the first full year of operation. Then we move to the first paragraph underneath community relationships, Allison Sturdivant. Community connections to local schools are highly valued. Each community feels that schools are the heart of the community and values and supports equitable and quality public education for their children. The third part, I'm not 100% sure I got it exactly the way you said it, Dawn. The way I have it noted is each town may appoint local school councils or school advisory committees whose purpose is to serve as building-based councils or teams that operate in an advisory capacity, which is loosely the beginning of point B in the Allison Sturdivant language with a few changes. Dawn, let me just clarify, Dawn, is that what
Yes.
you feel like you said?
Yes.
Okay, Elin?
Restated, I am not as worried about the advocacy. I am much more worried about what I feel this relates to, which is the community connection.
Great. Nancy, then Mike? And Steve?
I think it's an interesting question whether the town or the unified board should appoint. I think may is not strong enough, and if it needs to be the board in order for it to be will, and I think maybe we should consider that. I really like what Dawn said about that these advisory councils, school-based councils, might have responsibility that goes beyond advising on the budget and the hiring of a principal. But I feel very strongly that we should include language that lists those as at least the two responsibilities that they will have, but write it in such a way that they might have certainly other advisory responsibilities. But I think the budget, if we don't put in those two crucial topics for their advisory work, I think it takes really the meat out of the intent.
I would point your attention to that first paragraph that says timely and sufficient opportunity for local input on policy and budget development. It doesn't specify the hiring of the principal, but it does have, it does mention budget input on that. So Mike, you were waiting?
So I'm under the scenario where it's town appointed may. I'm confused as to how that decision would be made and who would do it. So that was my one logistical question.
Great, so you have Steve, then Allison, then Elin, and I need to encourage us to move towards a decision unless we would all like to be here till midnight tonight. So
Cool.
we just want to think about moving in that direction because I know everybody likes to go home at some point. So Steve.
So I, in my own little way, am hung up actually on the second sentence of the initial paragraph. That sentence being, structures to support and encourage public participation within the unified district will be established by the unified district board of school directors on or before June 30th of the first full year of operation. I see these local town-based local school councils or school advisory committees as something that is potentially ephemeral. Different towns have a different relationship with their schools. I love the fact that they're not a PTO, since I'm not a parent, and that this is a way of trying to get that local engagement. I'm not sure if this second sentence relates to these. I mean, you could set them up as a possibility, and then but they don't have to be there at the end of June 30th. I'm just a little hung up on that, but I'm going to get past it.
Great, I think we had Allison, then Elin.
And Sarah, right? Did you?
I'll think of what I was
Okay.
going to say.
So, my first concern is that we are asking a town to appoint someone to be involved with their school, whereas I think it should be the school. It shouldn't be the town itself. Saying will or shall, establishing it, whatever the structures are, does make it very clear, talking to what you had mentioned, Kate, about the intent is there to tell the new board to do something, create some sort of structure before June 30th to make sure that the values that we hold continue going forward. And so will or shall, whichever word we use, demands that the new board do that.
Great, Elin?
So I have two things. One about the support and encourage public participation. We are, as a policy governance board, this is our charge. The public participation can't only be the advisory councils. The board needs to do things that are providing public input. So I very much want to keep that, and I don't want it to be only the councils. There has to be public input provided, forums provided by the board. which are separate from those school councils that are for the district as a whole. That's one. And then I'm not real comfortable either with the town appointing. The committee that I belong to, the advisory committee, we were appointed by the principal. I don't want to say who has to appoint. I would really like to leave that out of the motion and let that be decided down the road.
So I just wanted to clarify, so would you perhaps be suggesting that the language might say something, rather than saying each town may appoint in that third part, just to go back to the way it's written in the actual text, local school councils, school advisory councils may be considered.
Right.
Without a clear definition of who's doing that. Okay,
Yes.
great. Sarah?
To add to that, if I was hired as a principal, and my job, one of my major jobs is to create the budget, which I'm taking advice from my community. If there were people that were appointed by my town to tell me what to do, that would drag it out. And if I wasn't on the right same page as them, I can see that process being really annoying. And I would prefer to be able to seek out advice from people that where it would be fitting. So I'm not a principal, but I can imagine if that is the role of the principal, that we don't need to hire or appoint people to do the principal's job. So I am against the town appointing anybody.
So, guys, so I'm feeling a little conflicted here. We had scheduled to talk about the articles until 7:45, which I realize is not realistic, because that's 4 minutes from now, and we're still on the first one out of a number of potential articles that we've proposed. I'm not really sure whether I'm not feeling like there is a motion that is about to be made that is on the verge of passing, because I feel like we're all still in limbo a little bit. We have to resolve this stuff like tonight, right? Because in 2 weeks, we are having a community forum to present the articles, granted in draft format, but we can't go in with half of the articles like, oh, well, we thought maybe we would do something about community engagement, but we don't really know what that is yet, right? So I guess I'm rambling here. My feeling is that not being on the verge of having a motion about this, I'd like to come back to it a little bit later in the meeting.
I would like
Do
to
you want to make a motion?
I just wanted that sentence, the first sentence in B, I want to change the may to shall. Shall be considered.
In
The local council.
So,
School advisory.
So,
I'm sorry, is this a motion?
this is as you
So we
read
didn't have a
before
motion
with
for it,
Dawn,
yeah.
as you read before what came from Dawn, but taking out the part about the town appointing, leaving that up to future people to decide, and making it just a little bit stronger by changing it to shall.
great.
Clarify the motion.
I would love to get a second, and then I will read the whole thing. Is that
I'll
okay?
second.
Herb? Seconded by Dawn.
Friendly motion accepted?
There's not an amendment,
Okay.
or there's not a
Oh, I thought
motion now.
she hadn't made a motion, okay.
There was no
Sorry.
motion on the table. I just wanted to get it seconded. I will be happy to read the whole thing. Okay, so this is what we read before. So this is the first paragraph under community engagement and input from Nancy. The unified board shall provide timely and sufficient opportunity for local input on policy and budget development. Structures to support and encourage public participation within the unified district will be established by the Unified District Board of School Directors on or before June 30th of the first full year of operation. Moving now to the first paragraph under community relationships, Allison Sturdivant. Community connections to local schools are highly valued. Each community feels that schools are the heart of the community and values and supports equitable and quality public education for their children. Moving to the third part, which is the first sentence under letter B. Local school councils or school advisory committees shall be considered whose purpose is to serve as building-based councils or teams that operate in an advisory capacity. Elin, did I read all of that the way you intended in your motion?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a motion. We have it seconded.
So the motion, who's the second?
Dawn seconded. I feel like we've had a significant amount of discussion, so Nancy, just a short comment.
I'd first like to say that This is a pretty important discussion. I'm glad we're not cutting it short. And I'd like to suggest that a way to go at this that would be a bit more specific, but hopefully not too binding, would be to add to that first paragraph, after first full year of operation, these words: those structures will include, but will not be limited to, school councils that have advisory responsibility in the key in key areas, including but not limited to budgeting and the hiring of a principal. So
Is that an amendment or just a comment?
I guess it's a friendly amendment. I hope it's not an unfriendly amendment.
So
I
we
hope it's not an
clarified
amendment.
procedurally last time that a friendly amendment is one that is accepted by the person who made
Right.
the original motion.
Right.
And if it's not accepted by them, then you can offer it as a regular old amendment, which then has to be seconded and has to be
Yeah.
voted separately.
Do you want to hear it again?
No, I want to, yes, yes,
After this,
right.
those structures will include, but will not be limited to, school councils that have responsibility in key areas, including, but not limited to, budgeting and the hiring of a principal.
Can you read that from
And
after
I
the
don't-
first,
I don't
but not
underst-
limited to?
I don't understand why that wouldn't come at the end. Because we
Well,
haven't
the
talked
reason it would,
about.
the reason I placed it there is because this first paragraph is instructing the Unified District Board to create structures
Right.
by June 30th of its first year.
Yep.
And this part is saying one of those structures must be this.
So I guess Elin needs to determine if she is accepting the friendly amendment. I'm not really sure procedurally how that happens. Basically, if
Yeah,
you
right.
consider it a friendly
Yeah.
amendment, then your motion now reads with Nancy's language. If it's not a friendly amendment, then.
Yes,
So you're considering it a friendly
I am
amendment?
considering, yes.
Okay, so I want to make sure we have that full language. So Nancy, I have those structures will include but not be limited to local school councils or,
Local school councils that have advisory responsibility in the, in key areas, including, but not limited to, budgeting and the hiring of a principal.
wait, look, have advisory responsibility in key areas? Is that
Yep.
what you said?
In key areas, including, but not limited to, budgeting and the hiring of a principal.
Okay, great. We are gonna move to a vote. And I wanna say that I completely understand Nancy's comment about giving everything the time it deserves. I just am concerned that we still need to discuss Article 7, school choice, reduction of staff, transportation, education, quality and equity, long-term cost savings, and withdrawal of the report from the district before we even get to the report. So right now, it's looking like midnight to me. So I'm not sure how we're gonna discuss all of these things in the time that we have. So I realize that they're all really important and we have to make decisions about them. So,
Can I just say that we do need to make decisions and they need to be good decisions. And if we go much after 9 or 9:30, we're gonna start making bad decisions. So if we have to change our timeline, it would be better to do so in the interest of making good decisions, not bad ones.
I hear your concern, Nancy. I think that the committee has already adjusted the timeline once, and barring a decision by the committee to change it again, we are moving forward on the timeline that we're on. I think any further delay to the timeline would significantly impact our ability to meet the November vote that we are hoping to meet. So, great. So all those. Does anyone need the motion read again, or are we all good? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, including the friendly amendment, please raise your hands. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3 opposed. Any abstentions? I think that adds up to the right number. 1, so, hold on, I'm sorry. I said 5, 6, 6, 3, 2, that adds up to the right number. Did you get
Madam
all
Chair,
of who moved
Madam
and the
Chair,
amendments and everything?
Before you count the votes, and I would request that I change my vote. I'd be allowed to change my vote.
Can we revote? Can we just revote then?
Just say your yes. Just say your yes.
I'm a yes. But
Okay, it's really helpful if people vote the first time because it's hard enough keeping track of the votes anyhow. Okay, so,
And that's in the interest of just moving this process along, not because I really am enthusiastic about it.
so then that would make the count 7-2, and so then,
7-3. I think there was.
no,
7-3.
because Herb
Yeah, Herb
changed
was
his
a no.
vote from
Okay,
a
thank
no to a yes. So that's 7-3, and previously we had noted 2 abstaining. 7 is, we need 8 for a majority tonight, so that means that I will need to vote. And as much as I would like to move things along, I'm gonna vote against the motion. So the motion, which should be recorded as being voted 7-3-1, and it does not pass.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I have changed to that language that will allow me to vote yes on that. So if I can remake the motion, I'm sorry.
Is that- No, it's not that. It's just
Okay.
I've gotten so many different versions of it written on my copy now. I'm trying to figure out how to make sure that I get the right stuff. So Steve, go ahead.
So it's the same motion that we just had. The Unified Board shall provide timely and sufficient opportunity for local input on policy and budget development. Structures to support and encourage public participation within the Unified District will be established by the Unified District Board of School Directors on or before June 30th of the first year. These structures may include local school boards, et cetera, in key areas not limited to budgets.
All right, so you're gonna change the will to a may.
I am.
And the rest of it remains the same.
That's correct.
Is there a second? Second by
Elin.
Ed. Oh, thanks, Elin. I saw Ed first. Okay,
Can you read this section about the structures again, please?
So-
Those structures may.
just that one sentence?
Yep.
So those structures may include but not be limited to local school councils that have advisory responsibility in key areas, including but not limited to budget development and hiring the principal or something. I didn't get all of that last little part. Yeah.
And then we're including that first community connections paragraph.
Yep, and then the rest of
then
it remains the
The
same.
local, okay.
So it ends with education for their children,
It still ends with.
committees of the board.
And then after
No.
education of their children,
Advisory
as far as I
capacity,
understand,
period.
local school councils or school advisory committees shall be considered whose purpose is to serve as building-based councils or teams that operate in an advisory capacity, period. Okay, all those in favor of the
gonna
new
have discussion?
Steve's motion?
Is
Wait,
there-
I'm sorry, we got a second, Ed seconded.
Are you gonna permit discussion? Even if we're not gonna discuss, I think you have to say, is there any discussion for it to be valid?
Is there any further discussion after the last hour and a half's worth of discussion on this topic? Herb, did you want to discuss anything?
No, I mean, we need a lot more discussion, but we're not gonna have it, so that's fine. I just think that you need to actually formally ask the committee, is there any further discussion? before
Thank you for the
proceed to a-
procedural clarification. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. We got more hands. Might do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in favor. All those opposed? 2 opposed. And I'm abstaining, so that's 8 to 2 to 1, so the motion passes. Thank you, everyone. That was a lot of work that we did on that one. When we revise the articles, if anyone notices that you don't feel that the language gets in there exactly the way that we finally revised it, we have the video to refer to. But please do feel free to let me know, because I have a lot of versions of the notes about what we ended up approving, so. All right, you guys, I know that that has been a huge topic of discussion and concern, so I appreciate that we were able to work through that and get to an agreement. As with everything, I wish that we were able to be unanimous, and I am happy that we were able to reach something that I think is a good compromise on a lot of these points. The next article that we need to talk about is Article 7. Article 7 talks about real estate and property. It is on the page that is numbered 7 in the packet. We have talked about real estate and property at length on several previous occasions. I am cautiously optimistic that we might be able to address this one fairly briefly if we focus on the interests of what our concerns were about this article. So I believe that, and I remember we've had several motions that did not pass about ways to change this. I believe that the interest of the committee is to be sure that when the ownership of the buildings passes to the new district, that towns and community members are able to continue using buildings in ways that they are able to do that today. So I believe that that was the concern that was raised. I'm not sure that we got to a place of having exactly the language that people felt comfortable with on that. I wonder if we might just be able to add something. I think we had entertained adding an item C that we could even allow the lawyers to craft for us with the intention of preserving community ability to use the facilities.
Come again?
So rather than us, because we've had several motions that I think the intention of those motions is to preserve the ability of communities and towns to use the school buildings after the ownership of that building is transferred to the new district. So my idea that I'm floating to the committee is, could we agree to add an Article C with that intention and ask the lawyers to write some specific language that would accomplish that goal? Nancy?
I so move.
I second it, Elon.
Okay, awesome. So let's just make sure, so we've got that. Awesome, I know I just proposed it, but I gotta write this stuff down. So the motion then would be to include an item C under Article 7 with the intent to preserve local ability to use the school buildings.
And grounds.
School buildings and grounds. And that we'll ask the lawyers to write something.
I think your language was, Jen, in the same ways that they use it right now.
Great.
To be allowed to continue.
Because let's not go renegotiate those agreements. They're a killer.
Okay, is there any discussion?
Yeah, I need clarification. Is that a motion?
So Nancy made the motion and it was seconded by Elon.
Okay. And the motion was to add to number,
To add an item C under Article 7
right,
with, to be drafted by the lawyers with the intent to preserve the local ability to use school buildings and grounds in the same ways they are used today. Herb.
we are asking the lawyer to write language that would carry out that intent, right?
Yes.
Is there going to be any vote of the committee on the language that the lawyer proposed?
Yeah. Yes.
There will be a review of any comments provided by the lawyer, yes.
You're giving the lawyers rulemaking authority.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hands. We don't have Mike here. We have, I guess since Mike isn't here, I'll have to count him as abstaining, so that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in favor. Any opposed? So 9 to 0 to 2, so the motion passes. So we're gonna count Mike as abstaining because he's not physically in the room.
Okay.
And myself. Excellent. Whew. Thank you, guys. So, we have some other articles to discuss before we move, or other potential articles to discuss. Before we move into that, I wanted to give Andrew just a short amount of time, Andrew, as I always do, and tell you you can't talk too much. Just a short time to give us an update. Andrew was able to share a preliminary draft of our articles as we have them with the Agency of Education and got some, and this is just as a like FYI, here's a draft, do you have any comments? Are you prepared to?
Yes, I think Alice, did you print?
Oh, you had some handouts for something, for people or something?
The revisions?
Because I put the suggested revisions in a Word document, and I thought that Allison had said that she had printed those. Yes, so, I mean, those could certainly be handed out, I know that we don't want to go through those in detail, but I can speak to,
I'm sorry, can I cut you off?
Go ahead.
So, I haven't gotten a chance to look at it in detail because it came out at like 4 o'clock or something this afternoon. It's late breaking information. The idea, I think that a lot of the comments are wording type, they're minor types of comments, and so my intention isn't that we would review all of those and make those kinds of changes at this point. But we wanted to share this with you, and then we can obviously continue that discussion. My hope is that, you know, things that are not substantive would, I mean, obviously this committee will need to agree that we want to make those changes, but that we would not need to have a lengthy discussion of those. Allison, do you want to pass those out? Nancy?
I wonder if you could tell us who at the Agency of Education you shared these with, and
Can I have one?
who provided
I'll look
feedback.
downstairs. So, yeah, so Andrew, thank you for letting us cut you off. Go ahead with what you wanted to say.
I'll just speak briefly to what the Agency of Education will do for committees at the point of the process that we're in now, is that they will do a informal review of the articles or the report. So this differs from the formal review in that rather than having, I believe there's 4 people who look at it when they make the formal recommendation at the end, typically 1 or 2 people will take a look and tell us what they see initially. So I spoke with Donna Russo-Savage today, and she looked through the articles, understanding that they were not complete and that there were other ones to be discussed. There were a few things that she pointed out. The biggest one, which you'll see kind of...
So the feedback is just from her, yes?
Correct.
And she's one of the 4 people who reviews the final.
Who will do the final review, yes. The majority of the changes that you'll see, you know, I've underlined the new language and crossed out any words that would be omitted to go along with the changes. The majority of these were simply to be more clear, to use the language consistently, using forming school districts, for example. There were a number of places where we said that become part of the new unified union school district that was just redundant and she thought weren't clear. There are a couple of, there's one thing that we do need to talk about in detail, but before I do that I just want to glance through. The one thing she thought was not clear in Article 14 and suggested that I add the phrase after 4 years, because she just wasn't clear about when that whole process that we've talked about in terms of how a school could be closed applied. So that change, she believes, would just make it explicit that no school would close within the first 4 years, and that after that, the process we've discussed would be applicable. So before I talk about the one issue that I think this committee is going to need to wrestle with, I know we don't want to do any wordsmithing tonight, but does anyone have anything before I move on to?
I haven't had an
I saw
opportunity.
Herb had a question. Wait, you don't.
If Dander's asking whether we have any suggestions, I haven't had an opportunity to read this. My question, I guess, was which provisions that have been changed do you view as substantive as opposed to just clarifying words?
I think that's what you just said, just one.
Yeah.
So everything we've talked about so far, I think, has just been, I guess wordsmithing is a good word. Without changing, I think it was to make the language clearer, to not change any intent. That was, I think, the view that she had and that I did in terms of the language.
So can you move on to the substantive one then?
So the substantive one that we'll need to talk about is essentially Article 8. And if you recall our discussion about how the board of directors would be composed, the one issue that she had is that if this committee wants the directors who are allocated by town to be voted on by only those towns, that would then mean that in all likelihood the equal protection clause of the Constitution would apply, and we would be in trouble with the proportionality issues among the composition of the board that we have selected. She said that the whole process, she thinks, would not work. The language that we took came from Rutland Northeast, and the language was identical except for the town names and numbers, with that exception. Their board is elected by the entire community. So if we want to use the method that we talked about that comes up with the 3 from Bristol, 1 from each other community, and then 4 at large, those directors would need to be elected from the entire new district. All 5 towns would vote on the representatives from Lincoln and all the other communities.
Can you clarify for me, because I'm not clear on this, and I might not have been listening clearly when you were speaking a moment ago, but so, is she saying that we have to change it, or we have to get the lawyer to tell us if we have to change it?
She's saying that that from her understanding this would not meet the Equal Protection Clause. She commented that the AOE is now requiring that an attorney write them a letter that says that the Board of Directors composition meets the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, which has not been required in some of the earlier articles that were approved earlier this year.
So, clarification.
Mike?
Do I have it right that if we were just doing proportional representation voted by the town, if we did 2, 2, 2, 2, 5, no at-large members, that was a viable option?
Yes, I think that's the other viable option.
Could you say it again? I don't understand.
So I think what Mike is bringing up is the option that we had discussed, and the committee instead chose the one that we wrote down. The option to go proportional would mean that, for example, Bristol would have 5 members and all the other communities might have 2, and that those members of the board would be elected by the community that they represent.
No at-large.
So she's saying that having the at-large is not okay.
Or that's all at large?
Right.
So
Having additional at-large
so-
members, I see.
yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe another way I can put it, just to see if I can hopefully make it more clear and not more confusing, is if it is, if there's any proportionality, then it needs to meet the Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah.
If the voting is all at large, then it does not.
And having some additional at-large could potentially throw off the proportionality.
Either they're all at
Yeah.
large,
There's a-
all elected by town, and then middle ground doesn't work.
There is no hybrid.
The
Though-
hybrid
Though
doesn't
you
work.
said there is a hybrid if everybody gets to vote.
Yes.
So you could
We
have,
have a
you could
hybrid.
have specific Bristol, specific Lincoln, if everybody got to vote on them.
Yes.
And then the at-large.
Yes.
So it's either everybody votes or we vote by town completely proportionally.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the Rutland Northeast proposal, which is essentially our proposal, but having everybody vote for all of the board positions.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So, so before we, just toss this thing in the hopper, or you go out and consult with the attorney and find out if what we have said it does in fact meet the equal protections, which, by the way, I'm not a lawyer, but sure seems like it's an okay way to do it. But you're right, I'd want an attorney to tell us.
Can I just say, and I'm glad Jen isn't here to be disappointed in this, but I've been thinking about this, the plan that we made together in draft form in relation to Article 8. And I think that, I hope that we'd be, not just in light of what you've said, but but in addition to what you've just said, or what Donna Russo-Savage just said, that we'd be willing to revisit both the number of people from each town, because I think one really isn't sufficient, and the number of people on this board, because when I look at the work of a board, when you think about the policy governance responsibilities, if that is continued, the negotiation of contracts responsibilities, spreading it across 7 people, or even 11 people doesn't seem like there are enough people, and also having only one person from each of 4 of the towns. I mean, I think all of the towns need at least 2. So I know it's painful to have to think about opening up something we thought was closed, but since Donna Russo-Savage has opened it anyway, I hope that we can reconsider this, because I don't think what we had is workable for Donna's reasons and the other reasons I've mentioned.
Sarah? So the 52222 thing needs to be based off of the census, and it wasn't that. Am I right? It was 61222.
I think, I think it's 7.
So that was, I think, I think that was the original problem, that didn't provide Lincoln with 2 people.
Right.
And so
I think we'd have to go to 15.
everybody was wanting to have
We'd have to go to 15.
enough representation.
I mean, I guess what I'm suggesting is 15 and no at-large members.
Ed?
We did put a lot of work in on this and voted for this. I'm inclined to think that what Steve suggested, let a lawyer take a look at it before we revisit this, or we're gonna chew up more time tonight.
And let me address one thing. When you break down the 7 by town, the 3, 1, 1, and 1, it becomes difficult to justify Bristol with 46.7% of the population having 3 members, while Lincoln gets 1 member and they only have 10% of the population. So I don't know that we need to find the answer tonight, but I'm pretty confident that what we have in front of us is not going to make it all the way through the review process. So I think at some point, somehow, the board or committee at least needs to be prepared to figure out whether we're going to go along the lines of something that Nancy suggested, or to go to all-at-large voting with the numbers that we seem to like in terms of the board.
Great. I'm not sure who had their hand up first, so I'll go to Herb and then Mike.
I'm confused, Andrew, because I thought the 3-1-1-1-1 was something in the chart that you had proposed a couple of weeks ago. A 7-member board divided.
With at-large voting.
Okay, so is that did you have further comment, Herb, or is that?
No. So
Mike?
this is a new clarification for me. The proportional part is not, doesn't meet the 1 person, 1 vote standard in and of itself. Is what is.
Because of rounding, is that what the?
No, because
It's pretty dramatic if you look at the 7. This was an update I made after.
If I could still have the floor for a minute, I think for the moment I agree with both Steve and Ed. Let's get a determination from an attorney before we go back to it, and then discuss it again.
I think that's a good choice for tonight.
Elon?
I have a different question then. You said that that was the only substantive change, so I'm taking that the Article 7, that paragraph, that's because that's already state law. There's a whole paragraph crossed out at the bottom about disposal of property.
Yeah, that is really already stated earlier.
Great.
I think it's in section B, and I can't.
Okay, so it's because it's not a change, it's just language. Great.
Yes.
Same thing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. So, I think that for tonight, we can table it. I think that it sounds like many of the committee members are leaning towards allowing, I don't want to say if it's a majority because we aren't taking a vote, but a number of committee members are leaning towards having a lawyer give us further input about the proportionality. And I think that we will also, at some point, either tonight or next week, need to determine if we're okay with revising our articles for the other non-substantive changes. I guess that would be great if anyone felt comfortable making a motion to that effect, then we could make those updates in our working copy. Just these wording changes that you see underlined in the version that Andrew passed around. Ela?
I move that we make the wordsmith changing per the agency.
I'll second.
Seconded by Dawn. Great.
Be stylist.
Oh, good.
Mike?
Did you not like some of them? I didn't pick away.
That will require me to read it more carefully now, and that needs to be done tonight, I guess is my question. It may be that they're completely non-substantive and fine, but again, I need to read it more carefully to know that.
Other than that one, they're all the same thing over and over again.
So just so that everyone heard, Ellen noted that her observations other than that change, that one change where the paragraph is struck, it's basically the same, just calling things the forming school districts rather than the longer, wordier things that we used before. And there was the change about the 4-year clarification in Article 14. Allison?
And that's it. The wordy parts become forming district.
Just a second.
Yeah, there are
Nancy?
8 times.
I mean, I just think it's not a practice we want to pursue, to get something that at the meeting and be asked to make a decision about it before we've all had time with it. So some people are faster at assimilating written language than others, and I think we need to take the time that it takes. It's not going to be hard to do this next time.
Andrew?
I just wanted to say that, this committee can change the articles up until the point that you finally vote to send it off to the state board. So, I think approving the changes tonight, if you were to discover something that you had a concern with, Mike, you could bring that up at the next meeting. That's it.
Or similarly, we could approve them at the next meeting, because it's not that big of a deal. We do have a motion on the table at the moment. Is there any further discussion? Herb?
I haven't had an opportunity, so I generally don't vote on something that I haven't heard.
Ed?
I noted that I think 8 or 10 of the corrections are the same text, all the same language correction.
I agree. I'm trying to look for some of the language in Article 7, and I just can't find it yet. It might be there, but, I'm not ready to vote.
So
Kate?
when unified district is highlighted, does that mean that's our language, or, I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Where's that?
Under Article 8, proportional representatives.
That highlight was actually there.
Yeah, it was there.
At Article 8, we're going to have to come back to, we know.
Gotcha. I'm just noticing it's done a couple times.
So we do have a motion on the table to approve the language. We have heard some concerns from some committee members about not having sufficient time to review the language. I guess what we'll do is we'll have a vote, and if the motion doesn't pass, then we will consider it again next meeting. So all those in favor of approving the wording, the basic wording changes suggested by, in the draft from the AOE, please raise your hands. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And all those opposed? We have 4 opposed, so, and 1 abstention, the motion doesn't carry. Herb, did you, get that vote?
What was the favor?
6, 4, 1, so it does not pass.
Thank you.
Take it up.
Thank you. I know it's very hard to take minutes and participate in a meeting.
There could be an alternate second minute taker for when I'm speaking.
I feel your pain.
when I'm
I was the
thinking.
minute taker for many, many meetings last year, so I feel the pain. So then I suggest that we will table those changes from the AOE, and we can consider them next week. I am cautiously optimistic that we will be able to approve them easily next week, and we will revisit the question of the board representation at this point when we hear back from a lawyer, unless we decide it sooner.
We've lost a member.
We have lost 1 member.
I think that's
Yes.
right.
Yep. And so we had 11, so we'll have 10. Yes, Dawn very considerately has her son hanging out in the hallway waiting for us to be done this meeting, so she had let me know she was gonna need to leave a little early. Do we, I see a lot of people stretching, do we need to take a short recess before we move on to the next ones? I'm gonna ask we should try to keep it to just a couple minutes. If you need a bathroom, it's out that door.
It's like painting.
It locks behind you, so we'll try to keep someone around in the hallway.
I went into a classroom.
Is there one that way?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just take a short recess, it's like 8:21, so I will start talking again at 8:25, whether you're here or not. I'm so glad that everyone's enjoying the trail mix.
Thank you.
A little fuel for the long discussions. I still fondly remember one of those many board meetings where Ari pulled out his nice hot dinner in the middle and we all were ready to beat him up for the food because we were like, come on, you can't bring out fragrant food. We were all very jealous, so tonight we have not such fragrant food, but something anyway. So at this point, we still have some articles that we have not come to, but we do really need to spend some time on the report tonight. So my recommendation is at this point that we move to agenda item 5 to spend a bit of time looking at the report.
Confused by that, to ask about our timeline, and I understood, and I've understood for some time that there was a great deal of pressure that we come to through major decisions about articles tonight with only minor changes in the future. I didn't understand that to be exactly the same push for the report. Maybe I have it wrong,
So it's a great point, Mike. We really need to do both things tonight, and I'm not sure how to do them both because we all start turning into zombies once it starts getting too late. We need to have a complete draft of the report and a complete draft of the articles at the end of next week's meeting because the following week we have a community forum where we are presenting those. So if we spend the entire meeting talking about the articles and don't talk about the report, that means that next meeting you will be asked to finalize a report on which you have had no input. So that I find highly concerning. So I would like to spend some time looking at the report tonight. And I'm very optimistic that we can also spend some time talking about some of those other articles as well.
I just say publicly, I have a great concern that we're not going to get to have a conversation about some of the ideas that have been put on the table. So that's fine.
Nancy?
I'd also like to say that I just received the report this afternoon and I haven't read it. So if we're going to spend an hour on it, I will need a chunk of that time to read it in order to think thoughtfully about it.
I hear the concern. I also have not had time to read it because it did come out just shortly ahead of the meeting. The goal of this section of the discussion is that I had asked Allison to go through and sort of talk us through the different parts of the report, knowing that we haven't read them in depth, but sort of what are the different components of the report, what's the purpose, what's the information that's in there, so that we have all had an opportunity to familiarize ourselves with that. So that was my goal for this
So we
part
won't
of
be
the meeting.
making decisions about the report.
I think we could be having discussions about the report. Okay, so with that being said, hopefully everyone has the, has the report either electronically. Ari, did you,
I have a copy.
Do you have an
I have
extra
an extra copy. I did, in fact.
you
Ari,
are
if you want
amazing,
one.
Steve.
Love one.
This is the one that's the 36 pages, right?
I got the
Allison,
town,
can you
yes,
confirm
that's
that
correct.
that's, okay, thank you.
36
Well, I have it,
pages.
but I have a lot of
So
numbers.
this is
That's my
in
problem.
the back in the agenda packet.
Oh,
I
I'm
guess
sorry.
not, so I have this.
Okay, great. So Allison, take it away. And Andrew, you're gonna be making notes about, in addition, well, Herb will be taking minutes that specific to changes
Oh,
or
maybe she
things
is
that come up, right? Great.
Okay, so the first part of the report is the study committee worksheet for all phases of a voluntary merger. And it has to be submitted to the agency with our study committee report. So the first part asks for the essentially necessary or advisable districts. So it lists all of our 5 elementary districts, and then Mount Abe is noted as a necessary district, but it says the Union High School District will not hold a separate vote on the unification, as all 5 member towns' districts are represented by each of the 5 towns' district votes. So that's very straightforward. Then you have to submit what type of merger you're doing, and you have essentially 3 choices. An accelerated merger, a red or one of its variations, or conventional merger, and we're doing the conventional merger. You have to supply the date on which the proposal will be submitted to the voters, the date on which, if approved, the district would begin operating, the combined ADM of all necessary districts in the current fiscal year, and then the proposed name of a new district, which I put to be determined after a successful vote, because that's what we decided to do. So then the following tables are the 5 specific goals of Act 46 as decided by the legislature, and you describe how your merger will accomplish those goals.
Do you want us to hold questions?
I defer to you, Allison, how you
Yeah,
vote.
let's go ahead and hold questions, and then we can go further in depth. Then the next section is the Articles of Agreement, and essentially you're putting the articles that we have to have in the report in each of these sections, and they have specific ones that they want to see. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Allison, now you're on like page 8 or 9.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
just flew through the goals. She
Right, that's fine.
Right,
I'm just
yeah.
making sure I'm staying ahead.
I'm trying to make sure I have my pages correct.
That's fine.
So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then any other matters that the study committee considers pertinent, including whether votes on the Union School District leave or one or more other districts geographically isolated.
Are you on the same? The one, the page I'm looking at is
So
talking
it's-
about voting by Australian ballot for the other matters. You on the same?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on page. No, I see any other matters. Including the other social media.
Sorry, what page you on?
So it's the page labeled 9, continued onto the page labeled 10, right?
Mhm.
Is that what you were talking
Right.
about? I just see that it notes any
And-
other matters, and it
right.
specifically mentions Australian ballot. I didn't see that it mentioned the other thing that you mentioned. Maybe that's also what they're looking for.
Any other, oh, maybe I read something in combination. Okay, I read something in combination, sorry, that was my fault. I read part of page 7. So page 9, 210 is any other matters that the study committee considers pertinent, including whether votes on the union school district budget or public questions shall be by Australian ballot, or anything else that we need to put in there. So you'll see there isn't specifically an Article 11, 12, 13, or 14. And
Those just go under other.
right. Okay. Then you get to the report itself. So there's the face page, and then you have a table of contents, a list of the charter committee members, advisory participants, an executive summary, and let me just preface this by saying I've taken other reports and kind of consolidated the information and made it specific to the ANESU. So whatever we eventually determine to put in here as data and specific information, it could potentially change some of these things. But this follows the standard boilerplate that other communities have submitted and gotten approved. So I included an ANESU context section showing recent enrollment trends. On the bottom it says page 3. Expenditures per pupil, so that's the spending per equalized pupil. And then there's a student to teacher ratio that that data is on the Agency of Education website, because that had been mentioned as a concern, that one of the goals is to increase student to teacher ratios, and we may be able to say that we don't have to address that immediately because ours are sufficiently high. And then,
Can you explain that? I don't understand.
so the state has a minimum of students per teacher, which is 10, and the state average right now for 15-16 is 10.45. So all of our schools are above the minimum, and other than Mount Abe, they're all over 14 students per teacher. And those are the classroom teachers.
Typically they count professional staff, I believe in that. But maybe this number is different. But that might not be significant right now.
That's a good, it's an
No,
important question.
it's not professional staff, because
It's an
there's
important
another line
question.
that considers professional staff to student ratio.
It's all data too.
So then there are as I mentioned last week, there are boilerplate sections that the majority of the other reports have, and it pulls together all of the data. So this is just a sampling of what other reports have stated, and
Which is, what page you on, sorry?
it says page 6 at the bottom.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So our own data will inform exactly what we say in these, but it's at least a starting point. So we have, and these categories address the 5 goals specifically. So you have improved student learning opportunities, teacher staffing, non-teacher other staffing, student data collection and reporting, support services, professional development, technology, financial accounting and budgeting, improved utilization of buildings and sport facilities, centralized contracting, transportation, food service, governance, cost savings and expenditure redirection, and time reallocation. And then the page 21, it says vision for a new district. That's the way one of the Addison districts placed it. But they discussed the act itself and the goals specifically. And I've read through a number, actually I've read through all of the ones that are on the Agency of Education's website, and other than specific names and things that they do in their district, a lot of these things are very, very similar in terms of their wording. And then we have to include our articles in full. And the ones that are in here, starting on page 28, are the articles that we had before we discussed them tonight. So the way they are in tonight's minutes. So they don't have any of the changes or anything that we discussed tonight. And those go all the way through 32. And then page 33 could be a possible appendix, analyzing the benefits of unification. It talks about the goals again, and it was just one example of a way to provide that information. And there are a number of different ways, but it's a starting point.
Great, Allison, thank you so much for reviewing that, and thank you so much for your work on putting this together so that we have a starting place for discussing the report. So, I know there were some folks who were holding some questions. So, what questions do we have? Who would like to be recognized? Really?
I guess I had one about the cost savings. I don't feel that tax break is a cost savings. So it seems strange that would be there. I don't know.
Which page, sorry?
I'm trying to find it. With the cost
The financial accounting and budgeting? No.
The very first thing is the 2, 3, 4.
Page 19? Is it page 19?
Yes, page 19. Tax incentives.
That's labeled 19 at the bottom?
Yes, label 19 at the bottom.
Okay.
Cost savings and expenditure redirection. The tax incentives in the first 4 years, I don't feel that that's a cost savings. It may be a cost break for our specific, but I don't think it's a.
And like I said, a lot of this is
Yeah.
copy and paste, so.
Yeah. So that's a
definitely
very
can-
small thing that caught my eye.
Okay, Mike?
Is this something that you envision will be handed out to the, will be used with the public? Will be handed out to the public meeting in a couple weeks, or will be used at future public meetings? Or is this something that is designed to sell it to the board, to the state board? Agency.
And Andrew, would you like to speak about the purpose of the report?
It's certainly a public document. It'll be available online at least. I would not imagine that presenting, I've never seen a district try to present this report to the public at a meeting. There's simply too much information. I think the presentation that this committee puts together in a couple of weeks will probably cover what the committee can cover in 20 minutes or half an hour and give people a chance to answer questions. So I guess the short answer to your question is no, this certainly is a public document, but I wouldn't imagine that this would be something that we would be asking people to read. The people who want to read through it will.
But can you, it's my understanding that the actual thing that we're asking them to vote on is the report. Are the recommendations in the report?
They vote on the articles. The report itself, which includes the articles, mainly it has a lot of information that the Agency of Education and the State Board will use to make sure that this makes sense for students. So, for example, the financial implications are going to look at that and they're going to say, you know, these are reasonable. They want to make sure that this study committee has looked through to their satisfaction at a lot of these topics that we've been talking about for a long time. I think Allison's kind of put together in this format the issues that we've been talking about for a while. So the purpose of the report is really to inform the AOE and the State Board when they make their decision.
Can I just, and I want to clarify, so is the report reviewed by the lawyer or only once we go to the AOE?
The report should be reviewed by everybody, the attorney, the AOE, and the State Board.
Okay.
So this package mean, other than the fact that it's a first draft, this package is very similar to what you'll see on the website in terms of what gets sent to the state board for approval or denial.
Okay, Herb?
I'm looking at section 76F, contents of wanting to vote on to establish a union. Two articles, one has to do with directors, the other has to do with what people are going to be voting on. Sub E specifically mentions the final report.
Okay.
Are you in the statute or are you in the report?
I am in the statute.
Okay.
Oh.
So can you tell us, so the statute says what about the report?
Well, I think Andrew had said that it wasn't being voted on, and I think it is. Or maybe Mike had asked, you know, what's the purpose of the report?
Who's the audience?
Can you read us the like, is it just like a sentence or is it?
Bless you, bless you.
I had a question for Allison.
Yeah, I would have to look at that with
Yeah,
more time to look at it. I don't have enough context to know what that goes
The
with.
point I think is that it's a very important document, and it's going to be something that people are going to learn. I also had a question for Allison. We asked a lot of questions around financial matters.
Right.
And we haven't seen any yet.
Right.
I was wondering what's going to happen with that, and we're going to have an opportunity to see that before we vote on stuff.
Yes, yes, and I haven't had the chance to, we had a table of all of the debts and assets, and I haven't had a chance to put that in here, because there were actually a couple of questions about that, and some other pieces and other things that we've asked of the SU office.